Good morning, everyone in the Zendo and on Zoom, and good afternoon as well. On Tuesday mornings, we chant the Heart Sutra, and then we do a dedication to the ancestors, and then we chant Song of the Trusting Mind. And a few months ago, I think it was in February, I talked a little bit about the first 4 or 5 lines of that verse, which speaks about the benefit of not picking and choosing, the benefit of not having strong preferences. Because if our mental stability is dependent upon external conditions, which is why we tend to have preferences, we want this thing this way and that thing that way, and we don't want this thing this way and we don't want that thing that way. If our mental stability is dependent on those external conditions, then we're going to have a fairly tumultuous, difficult time, because the world doesn't go the way we want it to all the time. So the first part is talking about the benefits of not picking and choosing. And then the next line that we got to is when the deep meaning of things is not understood, the mind's essential peace is disturbed to no avail. When the deep meaning of things is not understood, the mind's essential peace is disturbed to no avail. So I guess to start, we need to wonder what is the deep meaning of things, which maybe is another way of just saying, what is this? You know, what is reality? And that's not a question that can be really answered just easily in terms of look it up, do a Google search and find out the answer. It's not really one of those sorts of questions. It's really something for us to contemplate deeply in our Zazen. What is this life? What is this experience? What is reality? What is the deep meaning of things? Something for us to really contemplate. And we're very fortunate that we have lots of teachings that can give us some ideas of what to contemplate. And even though in the teachings it says there's one reality or one truth, there's a lot of different ways to kind of point to it. There's lots of ways of saying it, because the words don't actually reach it anyway. So the words are just approximations in the first place. There's lots of different words that can help us get a feeling of what this is. What is the experience that we have through our senses every single day? From the kind of more negation side, one of the main teachings says there's no self. There's no self, there is no other. No self and no other. And from the more affirming side, we say true self or true nature, Buddha nature. They're both pointing to the way things are. There's no separate self, there are no others. If there's no self and there's no others, then we are actually intimate with everything, even if we don't know it. We're intimately intertwined with everything, even if we don't know it. And in the first part that we talked about a few months ago, about not picking and choosing, when we have this sense that there's no separate self, then the the impulse towards picking and choosing does become less. It just doesn't become so compelling to want things one way or want things another way. We can kind of relax and flow with things because we don't feel so much like we're a separate entity, kind of bobbing about, trying to make things go the way we want. We feel a little bit more connected to everything. So it's like a flow together. We can flow together with things. One thing doesn't quite go the way we want it, we can just kind of pivot a little bit with that, and then pivot a little bit over here and just flow with things. So we've got a nice flexible feeling to it. We just are responding, moment by moment responding. And there's a book by Mu Soan called Trust in Mind, which is about Song of the Trusting Mind. And I'll just read a few passages from his commentary on this verse. So on this line, when the deep meaning of things is not understood, the mind's essential peace is disturbed to no avail. This is the commentary. The deep meaning of things is that things have no own being. Svabhava. We've talked about this no own being. It's an unusual phrase, but the idea that we are a being, our own being. The teaching is that there is no own being. Or another way of saying it is that we're other powered. We're powered by everything other than ourselves. There's no self that powers itself. The working of the internal chatter is driven by unexamined beliefs that things have their own self-sustaining reality, their own validation. We become invested in things, whether psychological or material, because we believe, at least implicitly, that things and our apprehension of them are real. What we rarely understand is that we apprehend only our idea of things rather than things themselves. Selfing, which is a great word, selfing drives the engine of internal chatter, disturbing the original stillness of the mind and leaving the problems of dukkha still unaddressed. Dukkha is, we translate often as suffering or restlessness or dissatisfaction. All the training in meditative traditions is geared to somehow stop the noxious internal chatter that prevents mind from illuminating itself. That's interesting that he finishes there with prevents the mind from illuminating itself. Who would we be if we really illuminated ourselves and saw who we are? What is it that we would see? I think that we would see that we are everything. That's what we would see. There's nothing specific here, just everything. That would be to illuminate the self. And that is something that we need to experience ourselves directly in Zazen, through steady contemplation, not just in formal Zazen, but just in our lives. We can contemplate there's so many opportunities to contemplate in our day. And in this line where it says, when the deep meaning of things is not understood, the mind's essential peace is disturbed to no avail. It's kind of poignant and sad that we can have perceptions and judgments and believe them and be disturbed by them, and that can go on and on and on and on and on to no avail. It is not of benefit to us. It's not of benefit to other beings to believe all the machinations of the mind. It's fine to have thoughts, we can't help but have them, but we can just hold them very lightly, move with them very gently and lightly, and be willing to drop them at a moment's notice when some information comes that shows that our assessment was inaccurate, just like that. Oh, I was wrong, just like that. To be able to drop whatever temporary hypothesis we might have had about something. It's wonderful to be able to go, oh, I was wrong, and just let it go. Very liberating. So another part here about the relationship between this kind of wisdom, contemplation, and Zazen itself. I'd like to read a little about that. Another translation of this line is, if you miss the deep meaning, stilling your thoughts is of no use, which opens up the possibility of reading this line as a relationship between meditation, stilling our thoughts, and wisdom, perceiving deep meaning. One of the basic critiques of the yoga tradition by Buddhists in ancient and medieval India was that despite their proficiency in concentration practices, the yoga practitioners did not understand the context of original emptiness. That lack of context or deep meaning of things allowed concentration practices to become yet another form of striving. The essential stillness of mind is manifested only when all striving ceases. The ceasing of all striving itself becomes the context of a deeper understanding of the nature of things. So maybe another way to say that is that true wisdom, which of course is imbued with compassion, needs to have a kind of stillness of the mind. They go together. If there is what seems like a wisdom, but there's not a stillness of the mind, maybe that is more akin to something like scholarship or philosophy, which is fine. Philosophy and scholarship are wonderful. But when wisdom and stillness of the mind come together, that's the true deep wisdom. But you could also have a kind of stillness of the mind that doesn't have a lot of wisdom. And that is what we often call quietude. And that's what was sort of being referred to here in that paragraph that I read. We want to still the mind so that we can receive the wisdom teachings, and we want to allow that wisdom teachings to allow us to be even more still. And in that stillness, what that is meaning is still so that we can be receptive to this very moment. When our mind is still, we can hear. When our mind is still, we can see. And we can feel. Be present to ordinary, everyday life. And there was actually, I was just thinking about that and came across a beautiful description by Thich Nhat Hanh. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, here it is. For me, this is just a beautiful embodied expression of wisdom and stillness together. This is Thich Nhat Hanh speaking. I like to walk alone on country paths, rice plants and wild grasses on both sides, putting each foot down on the earth in mindfulness, knowing that I walk on the wondrous earth. In such moments, existence is a miraculous and mysterious reality. People usually consider walking on water or in thin air as a miracle, but I think the real miracle is not to walk either on water or in thin air, but to walk on earth. Every day we are engaged in a miracle which we don't even recognize. A blue sky, white clouds, green leaves, the curious eyes of a child, our own two eyes, all is a miracle. I also thought a little bit about one of the koans that we sometimes work with in the Diamond Sangha tradition, of which I'm also a part. It's a very simple little koan. It's just who hears. Who hears? And I was discussing this with someone the other day, that this stillness and wisdom come together beautifully in this simple little koan, because one way of working with the koan is just to keep listening, who hears, and just to keep hearing. So it's really stilling the mind and just bringing us into contact with ordinary sounds in this moment, over and over and over, just this moment. What are the sounds? Very stilling of the mind. It's a beautiful, beautiful practice just to sit with who hears. There's a quiet stilling of the mind, being very present and aware. Then the other side of who hears is to ask in a contemplative way, who is it that is doing this hearing? What is it that is being heard? And any questions that we might just might come to us spontaneously, like what is the distance between me and the sound? Does the sound come to me, or do I go to the sound? Where does the sound arrive in my ear? What happens to it when it goes in there? We can just contemplate in this way, in whatever questions come to us about who hears, who is it that hears, what is it that's heard? What's the relationship between the hearer and the heard and the hearing? And that contemplation isn't just because it's out of just a general curiosity, although that is good too. It's really to help us understand the nature of things. And the way I like to think of it is to kind of close the gap. We're always working towards closing the gap between ourselves, the one that hears, and the thing that is heard. Close that gap. The gap isn't there, but there's a perceived gap. Close the perceived gap. So the next line from the Song of the Trusting Mind is, the way is perfect, like vast space, where nothing is lacking and nothing is extra. This one line you could just contemplate for your whole life. The way is perfect, like vast space, where nothing is lacking and nothing is extra. So the way, we could think of the way as the way things are, another way of saying the nature of things, the way, and also our way of practice in response to the way things are. We like to hope that all the practices that we do and the teachings that we do are in accord with the way things are. That's why they are wise, and that's why they are beneficial. But I think this word perfect could be a little confusing for people, to say the way is perfect or the way things are is perfect. But it did occur to me that that the way that this word perfect is another way of saying things actually make perfect sense. If we could see all the causes and conditions, everything would make perfect sense. We wouldn't be confused and we wouldn't be surprised. We would go, oh, of course, no wonder it's like that. If we could see all the causes and conditions, it would be perfectly clear why everything is the way it is. And there are stories of the ancient Buddhas actually being able to see all the causes and conditions. Often the way it's described in the early texts is that they could see all their former lives. That's the way it would be often worded, that they could see all of their former lives, every single detail of every meal they ate on every day and every activity of every being they ever were. And you could think of that maybe as a sort of a poetic way of seeing they could just see all the causes and conditions of everything. And even though we can't see all the causes and conditions, we can imagine that there are causes and conditions that do explain absolutely everything. How someone got to be the way they are, how a country got to be the way it is, how a landscape got to be the way it is. And if we can trust the truth of this by examining it ourselves and see that causes and conditions are the way things are, things are because of all the causes and conditions, it really reduces, if we do it deeply enough, all confusion is lost. There's no confusion because we don't need to know the actual causes and conditions. We can just trust that they are there. And then we're not confused when something happens that we can't explain. We can trust I can't explain it, but it's theoretically it could be explained. It just probably won't be. Everything's too complicated. And language doesn't do it. So we can't actually do it, but we can trust that it is so. That it is so. And I think I'll share an example of something. I was watching the news online and about a man in Canberra a few days ago who was on an e-scooter doing 100 kilometers an hour, which is like against the law. You're not allowed to go that fast on an e-scooter. There was a short video clip with a whole article about him. And I watched the video clip and two police motorbikes were trying to get him to stop and he wouldn't stop. And he veered off, he was on a main road, he veered off onto a bike path and the two police motorbikes were kind of getting in front of him and behind him and to the side of him, trying to make him stop, and he kept on going. It was quite stressful to watch because once they're going down an ordinary bike path, there's people going the other way, and people on bicycles and people walking. So it was quite a dangerous experience. As I was watching it, I couldn't help but be asking myself, I wonder why he won't stop. And I wonder why the police also won't stop, because it was kind of dangerous what was going on. And then I started to imagine different things, which I don't need to go into, but just imagining different reasons why a person might not stop. But eventually, he had to stop. And the two motorbikes cornered him in such a way that he fell off, but luckily he didn't get hurt. But then, and this is where tears came to my eyes, he just kind of got off his scooter and said, I have to get to work. I need my job. And it was just such a sad moment. And in that moment, I felt like I got to see into the causes and conditions for a few seconds about why this person wouldn't stop on his e-scooter. And no doubt there would be other factors, but this was what was driving him. And maybe the police, I didn't get to hear from them, but maybe the reason they didn't kind of give up on the chase, because it had got quite dangerous, was maybe they were a little bit confounded. Like, people are supposed to stop when the sirens go and the lights flash, and this person's not. And they probably had their ideas about why, but my guess is they didn't think that it was because he was running late for work and that he maybe was poor and this job was super important. My guess is that that was not one of the thoughts they had. It was probably more like he's got some criminal history, or he's got drugs, or he's committed a crime. That was probably more likely, some thoughts like that. So it was just a moment that led me to think about how wonderful it would be if we all just imagined that there's always causes and conditions for absolutely everything that everybody does. We would probably we'd be a lot less quick to simple judgments. We'd be less likely to jump to some simple conclusion. I don't know if I want to read that part. So that line, the way is perfect like vast space, where nothing is lacking and nothing is extra. So when we see all the causes and conditions in our own life, for example, then we can have compassion for qualities in ourselves that maybe we're not so fond of. And we can see that in this moment, there's nothing lacking and there's nothing extra, that we are exactly who we are. And it completely makes sense that we are who we are and we can do what we can do and that we can't do what we can't do. And the whole reason that we have the Dharma and that we teach the Dharma and share it with each other is that when we hear something kind and something wise, then our capacity starts to shift. Our capacity changes. So even up to the moment before we heard something helpful, we weren't able to do any better than what we were doing. Then we hear something helpful that just gives us a turn in a certain way, and our mind can expand in a certain way. And then our conditions change. Or another way of seeing there's nothing is lacking and nothing is extra is just this moment that we're in is the perfect moment. Here it is what it is. We can receive it wholeheartedly, just the way Thich Nhat Hanh was describing walking, just walking on the earth, breathing in the air. So the next line, I'll just say a few words before I finish. On the next line is, indeed, it is due to our choosing or rejecting that we don't see thus. So it's just our choosing and rejecting, our habit of judging quickly, that we don't see how perfect everything is. So this is an encouragement for us to see if we can just experience without too much language coming in too fast. Just hear, see, without adding too much concepts or language. It's a great habit to develop, to just look around in your house, in your car, when you're walking, any space that you're in the workspace. Just to look around and notice. Notice the carpet, notice the walls, notice the cup in your hand. Just to bring our awareness to ordinary everyday life. I'll just read one more little bit. In the vast clear space, things are manifesting themselves according to causes and conditions. Geese are flying according to the nature of geese. Wind is blowing according to the nature of wind. The sun is hot according to its nature. The moon is cool according to its nature. Their manifestation does not depend on our choosing to accept or reject the nature of those things. We get fixated in our reactivity to the blowing of the wind or the heat of the sun, and that fixation in its self-obsession does not allow us to see that things are unfolding according to their inherent natures. In the vast complex of networks, the manifestation of each thing depends on the underlying causal network. We can perhaps accept this intellectually, but we lose our way when it is pointed out that the same is true of the contents of our own minds. Our conditioning too is a vast complex of causes and conditions, and the mind state of the present moment is but a manifestation of this underlying network. We can mistakenly identify with this mind state as me or mine, or we can just watch it come or go. So that last little bit, we can mistake it for me or mine, or we can just let it come or go, is kind of a nice way of noticing, in a lighthearted way, noticing we're having a thought, maybe we're having a judgment about someone, we're being a bit critical about someone. And instead of feeling too much ownership of that thought, we can just go, oh, there's that kind of judgmental thought. And we can almost be amused at ourselves for having it. Well, there's that self-deprecating thought. There's that arrogant thought. There's that fearful thought. Not identify too strongly with it as me or mine, because there is no self. These are just thoughts that arise because of causes and conditions. And we cannot identify too strongly with them. Just watch them go past. All right, I think I'll finish there and see whether anyone would like to ask a question or comment.